Okay, we're live already. Okay, thank you for all being here. This is part two of the consciousness discussion, the collective consciousness discussion. And I'm still running this as a test. So even though this is this is a pretty done-ish looking video, this is the first time that I'm having the webcam as like me here. Obviously, thrilled. Like, I have other videos where I'm on it, but not with this particular setup here in my studio, my new studio, which my higher self, God, whoever, has provided for me. There we go. And everything, pretty much everything, up to and including the background. There we go. Right. Yay, shaking. All right. So the discussion still follows what is collective consciousness, and I cannot really. There's a left brain and a right brain way to answer this, and so I am. When I say I'm the buck stops here kind of guy, that means I need to see the data. I need to see the proof. I need to see the empirical thingamabob, the white paper, whatever you got, file, the link, whatever. Let me see where you're pulling the information from, because I need to see it. I need to, understand it. And so that part of it is a scientific method of accumulating as much of the data as you can and being an observer. I say frequently that more than anything, I am an observer. I don't make any judgments, not because I'm not able to, but because I want to put off the, getting as much data, the input, as I can. And so part of that is within the collective consciousness of all of us, of waiting, trying to get as much data and information as we can before forming a judgment or an opinion on anything in particular. That is the difference between an observer and a judge, or even a prosecutor who, is a doubter and wants to see, the having someone challenge you on your facts is not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing. And let me see where your data is, before you are a judge, because the prosecutor is not the judge. Remember, the prosecutor, the judge eventually passes a sentence, but you have to look at all the data if you're talking about judging and prejudging any, and I'm talking even about on a social level, everything going on and all the people, before you form opinions about anything in the news and the media, you need to look at all of the available facts. And that's how I am, and that's why I stay away from a lot of the stuff on public TV and news and all that stuff that's on the media, because I am not able to otherwise verify a lot of the claims in, say, Wisconsin, for example. And so there's a lot of talk and a lot of, chatter on YouTube and the news, especially the news, about, current events. And it's like, I'm staying clear of making an opinion on any of that or a judgment on any of that, because I do not know what had happened. And I try and keep my mind and my attention and my consciousness on the local level of what's happening around me. Because there is always a projection on the news and the media of what they want a person to know. And that's all I'm going to say on that subject. That is why I don't follow a lot of the current events going on and happening, is because I don't want to know only the one side, and a lot of it bothers me immensely that I don't want to know about it. I just want to pray about it. and offer from my heart forgiveness and acceptance of everyone, And so that's what I will say on current events. But it definitely follows through, because where is your consciousness? When we talk about collective consciousness, you have to address your own consciousness first. Are you awake, or are you still falling into duality or scarcity conflict? Are you still a person of, without even putting a label on someone, it's hard to kind of describe a personality type, but of a person who's living in a negative, lower existence of reality. 3D is not the problem. Living in third density is not the problem. It's when people are living in an even lower than third density construct, the two-dimensional construct, that they're trying to tell you is a three-dimensional construct, right? That's almost, to me, one of the problems that I'm thinking that is on this. Your third density, third dimension. I've talked about density and dimension. There's two different things. Third density and third dimension, both, right? They exist, both of them, density and dimension. They're not exclusive, and the reason I talk about density is the physical presence of being able to manifest by calling it forth. Good golly, and the bikes, even the bikes. What's my conscious intention? Hey, I'm going to make money on the bikes because I love bikes. I'm going to work on the bikes. And so they gave me a bunch of the Providence, the city gave me a bunch of, not the city itself, but the city as a entity, a living entity, not the official legal entity, but you know what I'm saying. They provided me with material, and it's the same thing with this here studio. Before I poke my freaking eye out, this here studio, that I got what I needed when I set my conscious intention forth on it. And it's really important to know that me and my consciousness, right? I'm pulling shit out of my ass, right? What the fuck are you doing? Right? I don't know how to otherwise put it. But that is not a consciousness for everyone. It's not a reality for everyone. And there is a serious wake up and a reality check that's going to be happening to people, like a hip check or a hockey check in hockey, like that kind of a thing happening, that if you are not grounded in yourself and who you are and what your conscious intention is, you are fucked. You are fucked. And I'm sorry for you. There is no other simpler, better, softer way to put it. The conscious collective is rising significantly, and not everyone is on board with this. So the problem is the empirical, provable fact of this rising is one thing, but the density, we're talking about like the separating of the wheat and the chaff. We're talking about separating the polarity of humans to the point that there is no more polarity. I don't even know how to put it. Duality, right? That's a two-dimensional, two-density construct that's leaving. And there is no safe place, right? That point, when we're talking on the other video, I talked about Rene Descartes. I'm going to have to bring this up, and maybe the next video I'll do about Rene Descartes. I don't know if this will be a part 3 of this, but definitely talk about Rene Descartes, because he was on some shit. And so anyway, there's a whole more view of the collective consciousness that I want to talk about, but I want to bring forth the empirical evidence, empirical data of a scientist who I respect very much, Rupert Sheldrake, who talks about the morphic principle of intelligence. And so I am not going to go further talking about collective consciousness without bringing up, bing, this guy right here, bam, I love you, Mr. Sheldrake. I found him through typing in up there, Terence McKenna, up there, Terence McKenna Trialogues. Now this is not part of the Terence McKenna Trialogues. However, that's a good place to go to look up Rupert Sheldrake, Terence McKenna, and Ralph Abrahams, who is the father of chaos theory. Rupert Sheldrake talks about the Morphic principle, and Terence McKenna. He's my shaman, leader, guide. I don't even know. He's a cosmonaut. I'll have to do a video of him talking about Terence McKenna, or a series on him. Maybe that'll be a Patreon thing. I don't know. Anyway, all right. So I'm going to I probably should do an introduction of him, but I'm going to I think I'm going to do another video where I'm going to introduce Rupert Sheldrake a little bit better than just kind of spring him on you. Who is this dude? It's a thing, but I think I'll let him speak for himself. You can go to his there we go. All right. So it says, Rupert Sheldrake, PhD, is a biologist and author best known for his hypothesis of morphic resonance. At Cambridge University, he worked in developmental biology as a Fellow of Clare College. He was Principal Plant Physiologist at the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics in Hyderabad, India. From 2005 to 2010, he was director of the Perrott-Warrick project for research on unexplained human and animal abilities, funded by Trinity College, Cambridge. All right. So, in fact, he has Mr. Sheldrake, author and biologist. All right. So, this is Rupert Sheldrake's page. Okay. Read more. All right. So, this is introduction. Rupert Sheldrake. Rupert Sheldrake is a biologist and author of more than 90 scientific books and 90 scientific papers. And 9 books, and is co-author of 6 books. Okay, co-authored 6 books. His books have been published in 28 languages. He was among the top 100 global thought leaders for 2013, as ranked by the Duttweiler Institute, Zurich, Switzerland's leading think tank. On ResearchGate, the largest scientific and academic online network, his RG score of 33.5 puts him among the top 7.5% of network. His RG score of researchers, based on citations of his peer-reviewed publications on Google Scholar. The many citations of his work give him grade H index on 38.1. All right, so that's not he's been cited a bunch of times. All right, you go to sheldrake.org. He studied, all right, what's more important? All right, my time is limited on these things. I'm at 13 minutes. He studied natural sciences at Cambridge University, where he was a scholar of Clare College, took a double first-class honors degree and was awarded the Boston Botany Prize in 1962. He then studied philosophy and history of science at Harvard University, where he was a Frank Knox Fellow 1963 to 1964, before returning to Cambridge, where he took his PhD in biochemistry 1967. He was a Fellow of Clare College, Cambridge, it's a mouthful, in 1967 to 73, where he was a Director of Studies in Biochemistry and Cell Biology as the Rosenheim Research Fellow of the Royal Science 70 to 73. He carried out research on the development of plants and the aging of cells in the Department of Biochemistry in Cambridge University, while at Cambridge, together with Prince Rubery, he discovered the mechanism for polar oxygen transport and the process by which the plant hormone auxin is carried from the shoots towards the roots. All right, that's a lot. All right, but you get this guy knows is something about something, right? All right. So I got this mute starting at the beginning. So he's doing something with the class here, and this is an experiment he's doing. So we're not there. I'm going to save that for you too, so you can go back there later and check this out. Okay, the link will be, the link is here. Bam, great mystery channel. Okay, and if you check out that link, you will, if you check out the link, you'll see the video, and it's pretty cool. So for the first 7:33, all right, I'm going to play some music while he's doing his thing. And so somewhere around 7:33, or whenever the music stops. I don't know how long this mix is for.
A very simple test.
There we go.
It has huge implications, but I'll wait until I've explained a bit more about the theory so I can explain the test.
All right.
What I'm going to do this morning is talk about memory in nature, the idea that the laws of nature are more like habits. And I'm going to talk about morphic resonance and the collective memory, which is inherent in all species. This is, at first sight, a very radical hypothesis. But what I'm going to argue is that this is something that we're all going to have to think about whether we like it or not. Because science is in a state of crisis. Two of the most fundamental paradigms or models of reality in science have come into head-on collision with each other. Most people don't realize it's happening because it's happening slowly. It's more like two great tectonic plates colliding, and when they collide, you don't notice anything. Then there's an earthquake or a volcano or something. These two tectonic plates of theory are crashing into each other, and they're going to force us to change our worldview. Now, I think that the change they're going to bring upon us is a change towards the idea of a memory in nature, the whole of nature, the whole universe, having a memory. in order to put it in context, I'm going to talk about these two worldviews. And this involves a sort of fast forward through 2,500 years of intellectual history in about 5 minutes. So you're going to have to fasten your seat belts for this. What I'm going to do is show how these two fundamental models that we've all inherited, that we've all got part of in our psyche, are in collision and are going to force theoretical changes. The two fundamental models I'm thinking of are ones that we've inherited from the Greeks and the Jews, the two main ingredients of Western civilization. They are the ideas of eternity, the idea that nothing really changes, and the idea of evolution, the idea that everything changes and develops in time. The idea of eternity is something we inherited from the Greeks. The ancient Greek philosophers were obsessed with the idea that behind this world we live in, there's a timeless realm, a realm where nothing really changes. They probably got this idea from mystical experiences. Lots of mystics through the ages have said they've experienced a realm beyond space and time. The Greeks may have been influenced by mystery cults, mystical groups of people, influences from Asia, we don't know. But the fact is that the Greek philosophers were each trying to find their own solution to the mystery of eternity. They came up with different answers. Pythagoras and his school came up with the idea that the ultimate eternal reality is mathematical, that behind the world of appearances there are eternal mathematical truths, ratios and proportions and harmonies, which are true everywhere, at all times and in all places. Plato generalized the Pythagorean insight and had the idea that behind everything in the world there's an eternal archetype. Every horse, for example, is a reflection of an eternal horse idea, an imperfect reflection of an ideal form or archetype of the horse. And this is the realm of Platonic ideas or forms, usually written in philosophy books with capital I or capital F for ideas and forms, so you realize it's not just the regular use of the idea, of the notion. So those were two ideas that said that the eternal reality is beyond space and time, outside space and time, essentially living in some kind of eternal mind. The atomists or materialists came up with a different answer. They said that the only reality is matter, and matter's made of lots of little bits called atoms, and these endure forever. And the changing world we live in is because of the changing combinations and movements of the atoms moving in a void. So for them, matter was the eternal reality. And then Heraclitus, who was a kind of maverick among Greek philosophers, said that the only thing that remained constant was change itself. Well, he had less influence, but the Platonists and Pythagoreans had an enormous influence on Western philosophy. As Christianity took off in the Eastern Mediterranean, it had to be brought into relationship to the prevailing Greek philosophy. Christianity developed in a Greek world. The New Testament is written in Greek. And with the language of the New Testament comes the whole implicit philosophy of the Greeks. And it was relatively easy for early Christian theologians like St. Augustine to see how the Platonic philosophy could be fitted into a Christian theology. The Platonic forms or ideas were none other than ideas in the mind of God, aspects of the Logos, the second person of the Trinity. And God thought these ideas eternally. So that was a fairly easy assimilation. Platonism was somewhat eclipsed in Europe in the Middle Ages by the rival school of Aristotle. But at the Renaissance in Europe, there was a big revival of Platonism. And European intellectuals got very excited again about this eternal reality behind space and time. The founding fathers of modern science were all Platonists or Pythagoreans, believing that the ultimate reality is essentially eternal, mathematical, beyond space and time. They thought that the so-called laws of nature were eternal mathematical ideas in the mind of God, and that scientists could actually reveal or read the mind of God through discovering these mathematical laws. So when Newton came up with his law of gravitation, this wasn't seen as just a temporary human model. It was seen as the unveiling of the mind of God, the eternal mathematical truths in the mind of this mathematical God. The idea that God's a mathematician is perennially popular among mathematicians. And of course, of all people, it makes them closest to the divine. So this was a very influential idea, and at the Enlightenment, the end of the 18th century, when there was this cult of science and reason, the idea that human beings could understand ultimate truth was a very big part of that. In the 17th century, there was also a revival of atomism, the philosophy of Democritus. And the idea was that matter is made of lots of little bits, atoms. And basically, 17th century science, which laid the foundations for the sciences that we now have, was a kind of cosmic dualism of material atoms governed by eternal laws which were beyond space and time, that were themselves not physical. But they governed the physical atoms. No one explained quite how, but that was what was laid into the foundations of science, and has remained so till this day. In the 19th century, the permanence of the atoms was enshrined in the principles of the conservation of matter and of energy. And the conservation principles say the total amount of matter and energy and angular momentum and electric charge are always the same. And the laws that govern them are always the same. And that's why science is supposed to be, any experiment's supposed to be repeatable anywhere at any time, because the laws of nature are the same at all times and in all places. This is the implicit philosophy underlying science. The universe is eternal, matter's eternal, the laws are eternal. And most physical and chemical scientists just take this for granted. When you look at the Mendeleev's periodic table of the elements in chemistry, you don't have any sense that this could have evolved. It's like a Platonic form of the elements and how they are, a kind of rational order of things. In the 17th century, the founding fathers of modern science, who were all Christians, believed that the universe, although essentially eternal, was actually created by God in time. God was like a great machine maker who created the laws of nature and the universe, pressed the start button, and then the whole universe went on like a great machine. That was what they thought. But by the end of the 18th century, with the growth of atheism, people wanted to get rid of this engineering God who started off the universe. There was a simple intellectual move by which you could do this. Just proclaim that the universe is eternal. Then you don't need a God to start it off. And that's what Laplace, the great French physicist, did. When Napoleon asked him what place God had in his scheme of things, he said, "Sir, I have no need of that hypothesis." Because they'd already got a stripped-down version of God as a kind of mathematical engineering creator who just started things off and then stood back. And by making the universe eternal, you could get rid of that kind of creator God. So the universe was eternal, the laws were eternal, the matter was eternal, the energy was eternal. When Einstein worked out the equations of his general theory of relativity, he found that they showed that the universe should either be expanding or contracting. He couldn't believe that was true because the universe must be eternal. So he introduced the cosmological constant into his equations to make sure it stayed the same. He later considered that his biggest mistake. But the universe, because it was later discovered, the universe is actually expanding. But that was a huge shock to Einstein because so deeply embedded in the thinking of physicists was this idea that everything's eternal, that it was a terrible shock for him to find that perhaps the universe isn't eternal, that it's unstable, it's expanding. Well, these are the ideas that have got totally built into our conception of reality through physics and chemistry, this notion of eternity from the Greeks. But the other great notion that's changed our thinking is the idea of evolution, and that is rooted in the thinking of the Jews. The Jews were the only ancient people who saw time in a linear, progressive way. All the other great civilizations and people of the ancient world saw time as eternal, moving in cycles. They saw eternal cycles. Whole universes came into being and passed away, and new ones appeared forever. So the eternity goes with the idea of cycles, and that goes with the idea of reincarnation. The ancient Greeks believed in those things. The Indians do to this day. The Buddhists, with their cosmology derived from the Indian one, implicitly do as well. So the idea of eternity is the standard default setting for most ancient civilizations. The Jews were different, though. They had a model of history that was modeled on a journey, and the prototypic journey was the journey out of bondage